Hey everyone, this is going to be our video lesson for Unit 12 Lesson 3, which is solving by factoring. So if you remember in the previous unit, we did our factoring when we had something like x squared plus bx plus c, and we looked for what numbers are going to multiply to c and are going to add to b, and we got something that kind of looked like this as our final answer. What we're going to do is we're now going to take that one step further. Before we didn't have an equal sign, and today we're going to incorporate an equal sign, and it's going to now involve solving an equation, so figuring out what x is. Now, up until this point in this unit, we've been solving things where there was no bx term. Okay, everything was like x squared equals 81 or something along those lines. There was no bx term. So you're going to see today we're going to start incorporating that for some of, if not all of our problems. Okay? But before we do that, we want to first talk about a very, very important mathematical property, which is called the zero product property. Zero, obviously, just being a number. Product means multiply. And a property is just simply a mathematical concept that we follow. So by definition, the zero product property says that if the product of two numbers is zero, in other words, if I take two numbers and multiply them and my answer is zero, then one or both of those numbers have to be zero. In shorthand, that looks like this. If a times b is zero, then either a is zero or b is zero. So before we take a look at how this works practically, I want to just give you some very, very simple numbers. If you take any two random numbers, 2 times 5, obviously that's going to be 10. 6 times 4, that's going to be 24. If I were to challenge you to think of two numbers that multiply together and your final answer is 0, well, the only way that can possibly happen is if one of the two numbers is 0, if not both of them. 6 times 0 is 0. 8 times 0 is 0. 0 times 12 is 0. Okay, you get the picture. So in order to get a final answer of 0, then that means one of the things that we were multiplying had to be 0. Okay, that's what the zero product property tells us. So how are we going to use that? What we're going to do is this. We're going to take a look at some examples here. X plus 1 is one factor times x minus 2, the other factor. That's going to equal 0. So if x plus 1 times x minus 2 equals 0, that means one of two things. Either x plus 1 is equal to 0 or x minus 2 is equal to 0. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to solve both cases. Okay, if you recall, every lesson we've done so far in Unit 12, x has had multiple answers, like x equals plus or minus 5. Or we had our examples in yesterday's lesson, x equals 3 plus or minus 2, and we had to look when was 3 plus 2 and 3 minus 2. So in this example, we're going to have two answers as well. If, for this first one, x plus 1 equals 0, we just simply subtract that 1 from both sides, and x is negative 1. If we look at the second example, add 2 to both sides of our equal sign, and we get that x is equal to 2. So in this case, these are my two answers, negative 1 and positive 2. If we were to plug those in to check, if I plug negative 1 in for x, negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. 0 times negative 3 is 0. Okay. Likewise, if instead I plugged in 2, 2 plus 1 times 2 minus 2, 2 plus 1 is 3. Times 2 minus 2 is 0. Well, 3 times 0 is 0. Okay? So that just confirms that our answers were correct. Okay? Let's take a look at a second example. 4x squared times 3x minus 5 equals 0. So either 4x squared is equal to 0 or 3x minus 5 has to equal 0. Okay, so if we go back to our first example, this was similar to a lesson we had yesterday and the day before. Divide both sides by 4. 0 divided by anything is still 0. And if we take the square root of x squared, we get x. And if we take the square root of 0, that stays as 0. Okay. And looks like Notability is having a bit of an issue here. Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, and then if we look at our other example, 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. So we are just going to add 5 to both sides. 3x equals 5. Divide by 3. And x is equal to 5/3. Or you might have this as 1.6 repeating. Okay. Either one of those two answers is acceptable. So that's our zero product rule. What I want you to do very quickly here is pause the video, try practice problems 1 and 2 down here. When you have your answers for each, go ahead and resume the video and see if your answers were correct. First one, 2x minus 1 equals 0. Add the 1, and 2x is equal to 1. Divide by 2, and x is equal to 1/2. Or x plus 5 equals 0. Subtract the 5 from both sides, and x is negative 5. Example 2, x minus 5 equals 0. Add the 5, and x is equal to 5. Lastly, x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract the 1, and x equals negative 1. Okay, hopefully we feel pretty good about that, because now what we're going to do is we're going to add some steps from last unit to these types of examples here to make this all come full circle. So, solving by factoring, essentially what we want to do is move all of our terms to one side and have the other side equal to 0. Okay, that's an important part. We want one side of our equation to equal 0. Then we're going to factor whatever we have, and then we're going to use that ZPP, that zero product property, in order to solve. Okay? So first example here, x squared plus 5x minus 24. Okay, we are solving by factoring. So I want to think about what two numbers are going to multiply to negative 24 and add to positive 5. So remember, if they're multiplying to negative 24, that means one has to be positive, one has to be negative. Let's try our factor. Negative 1 and 24, that comes out to be 23. Negative 2 and 12, that comes out to be 10. Negative 3 and 8, that comes out to be 5. There's our factors. So when we set up our parentheses, that's going to be x minus 3 times x plus 8. And now here's this new part, equals 0. From here, we treat this just like the examples we did above. I'm going to set x minus 3 equal to 0. And we get x is equal to 3. And we're going to set x plus 8 equal to 0. Subtract the 8, and x is equal to negative 8. Okay, so we're taking that process of factoring that we learned last unit, getting to that factored form, and then applying that zero product rule. Okay, let's try another one. A squared minus 3a minus 18. So two numbers that are going to multiply to negative 18 and add to negative 3. So again, because we are multiplying to a negative, one of my factors is negative, the other is positive. Negative 1 and 18 comes out to be positive 17. Negative 2 and 9 comes out to be 7. Negative 3 and 6 comes out to be positive 3. And since we're looking for negative 3, that's our telltale sign that we just need to flip. Positive 3 and negative 6 comes out to be negative 3. So there are my two factors, 3 and negative 6. X minus 3, x plus 3, x minus 6. Now, instead of setting up these algebraic equations, what we might be catching on to here is that really we just want the opposite of whatever's inside the parentheses. If I wanted to make x plus 3 equal to 0, well, I just need the opposite of positive 3, which is negative 3. Because negative 3, when plugged in, negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Likewise, what number minus 6 is going to equal 0? Well, that's just going to be a positive 6. Okay? So, factoring our quadratic, and then setting those equal to 0 and solving. Same thing I asked you to do before. Go ahead and pause the video, try practice problems 3 and 4. When you've got your answers, go ahead and resume the video to see if you have those correct. All right, so in this case, we want to multiply to 20, and we want to add to negative 21. So 1 and 20 is positive 21. And since we want negative 21, the way that's going to happen is, again, just making those negative. Negative 20 times negative 1 is positive 20, and that gives us negative 21. So here are our factors. X minus 1, x minus 20 equals 0. We just want the opposites. Opposite of negative 1, x is positive 1. Opposite of minus 20, positive 20. So those are the two answers, x equals 1 and x equals 20. Okay, over here, w squared plus 26w plus 169 equals 0. Okay, I'm just going to cheat and use my mental math skills and know that the two factors are going to be 13 and 13. Okay, so that means w plus 13 times w plus 13 is going to equal 0. And in this case, we want the opposite of plus 13. W would equal minus 13. And we would actually get the exact same thing over here. So this one only has one solution. W is equal to negative 13. Okay. Now, the last one I'd kind of want you to take a look at because it's just going to kind of get repetitive in showing more examples. But if we take a look at this example 5, we had a rule up here. It was the first rule: move all terms to one side so that the other side is equal to 0. So in this case, we have x squared plus 22x equals 57. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 57 to both sides. X squared plus 22x plus 57 equals 0. Okay. And then from there, we could go about our factoring. Okay, again, in order to save some time, we'll stop there, but I just wanted you to see that extra step. Okay, same thing here in number 6. We can see that we don't have 0 by itself on the right side of the equation, so I'd want to bring this over here by subtracting it. X squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Notice I put those in standard form, highest exponent to lowest exponent. Okay. The only other thing you might want us to talk about really briefly is practice problem 5 here. X minus 4 times x plus 3 times x minus 5 equals 0. This is just one more application of the zero product rule. Okay, but now instead of having 2 terms, we have 3 terms. So x minus 4 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, x minus 5 equals 0. In this case, x is positive 4, x is negative 3, x is positive 5. Okay? So that's going to conclude this video lesson. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. But once you're done with this and you get done with your other coursework for today, you are officially on spring break. So enjoy your time off, okay? Stay healthy, be well, and we'll catch you next time.